There comes a moment in everyone's life when, without warning, something inside breaks. It's not sadness, it's not anger, it's something deeper, as if the soul is simply exhausted from carrying the weight of others' expectations, from maintaining relationships that only drain your energy, and from trying to fit into spaces that no longer belong to you. This is what Carl Jung described as the beginning of the true process of individuation, the breaking point where the mask falls and the authentic self begins to emerge. What's curious is that this moment doesn't arrive with grand announcements. There's no sign in the sky or a marked date on the calendar saying, "Today is the day you'll set yourself free." No, it arrives when you least expect it, but when you need it the most. It often comes after countless sleepless nights spent convincing yourself that things will get better. Maybe if you changed, tried harder, or ignored that tight feeling in your chest screaming that something is off, everything would fall into place. But it never does. It never fits. And then, in the midst of emotional exhaustion, comes the decision to finally say, enough. For Jung, this isn't just a whim or an emotional reaction. It's a profound message from the psyche, a silent cry that has been there for years, waiting to be heard. It marks the beginning of a journey with no return, because once you dare to let go of what doesn't belong to you, once you step toward your authenticity, there's no going back. What many don't understand is that saying enough isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of self-love. It's not the end, it's the beginning. But why is it so hard? Why, even when we know something is hurting us, do we struggle so much to let go? Jung explained this with painful clarity. It's because we build our identity around what makes us suffer. Maybe you haven't realized it yet, but for years, you've been telling yourself the same story. You justified your pain with phrases like, "That's just how life is. There's nothing I can do to change it. Maybe I deserve this," or "What if I end up alone?" Your unconscious accepted these thoughts as truth, and they shaped your reality. You stayed in relationships that drained you, jobs that dimmed your spirit, and dynamics that only wore you down. The worst part, a piece of you began to believe this was normal, that this is just how life is, but it isn't. Jung taught us that the soul is constantly seeking its own evolution, and this evolution requires letting go of what no longer resonates with our authentic self. However, for this transformation to happen, it's necessary to go through a painful but transformative process, the encounter with the shadow, with the tomb. The shadow represents everything you've repressed, the parts of yourself you were taught to hide, the desires, thoughts, and emotions you deemed unacceptable. But the shadow doesn't disappear simply because you ignore it. On the contrary, it shows up in subtle yet persistent ways, in the patterns you keep repeating, in the relationships that hurt you, and in the anxiety you can't quite explain. Here's the crucial point. When you finally say enough, you're facing your shadow head-on. You're challenging the belief system that has kept you trapped. You're allowing yourself to break down in order to be reborn. That's why it hurts. That's why it's so difficult. You're not just letting go of a person, a job, or a situation. You're letting go of a version of yourself, a version that walked with you for years, that became your refuge, your excuse, your comfort zone, but no longer serves you. It's no longer who you are. When you decide to let go, your unconscious reacts. At first, you'll feel fear. You'll have doubts. You'll wonder if you made the right decision. And this is where many people turn back. But here's something fundamental you need to remember. Fear isn't a sign that you're making a mistake. It's a sign that you're changing. The unconscious doesn't want you to change. Its job is to keep you in the familiar, the predictable. But your soul has other plans, and this is where the real internal battle begins, the struggle between the comfort of the old and the uncertainty of the new. Yet if you can hold on, if you can walk through the initial chaos without turning back, something incredible happens. You start to regain your energy. Jung described this as a kind of psychic rebirth. For years, your energy was scattered, trapped in dynamics that stifled your growth. Every time you tolerated a situation you didn't want, you gave away a part of your vitality. Every time you repressed an emotion out of fear of rejection, you drifted further from your essence. But when you finally choose to let go, all that energy returns to you. It's almost magical. What once seemed impossible suddenly becomes clear. What used to hurt doesn't matter as much anymore. What you thought you needed no longer makes sense. And there's something else, something no one talks about. something you only discover by going through this process. The love that emerges after saying enough is unlike any other. It's a love that doesn't depend on external validation. It doesn't need approval. It's a love born from within, the certainty that you are enough exactly as you are. And when you discover this, when you experience this level of self-love, everything changes. Your life changes forever. You stop searching outside for what has always been within. You stop settling for crumbs because you finally understand your true worth. You stop waiting for someone to save you because you realize you've always had the power to save yourself. And in that moment, everything begins to align. Not because the universe is rewarding you for making the right decision, but because you're finally in tune with what has always been yours by right. Relationships change, paths open, opportunities appear. Not because you're doing something different, but because you're finally being you. But this process doesn't end here. Once you discover this newfound self-love, there's something more you must do, something that will shape the rest of your life. When you start to experience the self-love that emerges after saying enough, something shifts in how you see the world. You used to justify toxic behaviors, minimize red flags, and tolerate things that deep down you knew weren't right. But now, with this new awareness of who you are, you can no longer ignore what once went unnoticed. It's as if you've woken up from a long sleep, and for the first time, you're seeing reality without filters. What once seemed normal now feels unbearable. The excuses you used to make for yourself no longer make sense. And this is where one of the deepest transformations happens. You begin to see people for who they truly are, not for who you wish they were. For years, you convinced yourself that if you tried hard enough, you could change someone, that you could make them see your worth. You believed that if you were good enough, patient enough, loyal enough, sooner or later, you would receive the love and respect you deserved. But now you understand that this was never your responsibility. No matter how much you love someone, you cannot fill the void of a person who refuses to fill it themselves. Jung explained that when a person hasn't integrated their shadow, they tend to project their inner conflicts onto others. That's why, in many relationships, the same toxic patterns repeat indefinitely. A person who hasn't faced their own darkness will unconsciously seek someone to serve as a mirror to project their chaos. And if, in the past, you were that person, if you allowed someone to unload their wounds on you without taking responsibility for them, it was because you hadn't realized something fundamental. You weren't there to heal them. You were there to learn how to heal yourself. But when you finally say enough and refuse to continue in that dynamic, something unexpected happens. The people who once controlled you with guilt, manipulation, or empty promises start to reveal their true colors. They may react with anger, try to make you feel guilty, or tell you that you've changed. And the truth is, they're right. You have changed. You're no longer the person who accepted the unacceptable. You're no longer the one who silenced your voice out of fear of losing love. Self-love is not a fleeting feeling. It's an inner construction that, once solidified, becomes the foundation upon which you build your entire life. But for this love to grow, you must face the hardest test of all: solitude. When you let go of what no longer serves you, it leaves behind a void, a space once filled with relationships, habits, and beliefs that, although painful, were familiar. And in this emptiness, in this uncertainty, fear arises. The fear that you made a mistake, the fear of being alone, the fear that you won't find anything better. But this is where you need to remember what Jung taught. The unconscious doesn't seek comfort. It seeks transformation. And every transformation involves a period of chaos before clarity arrives. During this process, it's normal for nostalgia to make you doubt, for there to be moments when you miss what you left behind, not because you want it back, but because your mind hasn't yet adjusted to freedom. But this sense of loss is only temporary, because deep down, there's something you know for sure. You could never go back to being the person you were before you woke up. And it is precisely at this moment that you begin to attract something entirely different. Not because you're desperate to fill the void, but because you are now vibrating on a completely different frequency. Jung said that what we experience in the outside world is just a reflection of our inner world. When you were broken inside, when you didn't value yourself, it seemed like everything around you only reinforced that feeling. Complicated people, stressful situations. It was as if the universe was always saying, "See, this is all you deserve." But then, suddenly, something changes. When you finally understand your worth, when you realize that self-love is not a luxury, but a basic necessity, the game changes. The people who were once part of your circle no longer seem to fit in, and not because you push them away, but because they no longer vibrate on the same frequency as you. Situations that you used to put up with a wry smile now become simply unacceptable. And you know what? You don't even feel guilty about it. Jung said that the greatest danger on the journey of individuation is the fear of emptiness. And emptiness is indeed frightening. That inner silence after saying enough seems unbearable. But what no one has taught us is that emptiness is a sacred space. It is the womb where the new can be born. If you try to fill that space too quickly, to go back to the familiar just because you're scared, you'll never discover what was really in store for you. So after you let go of what doesn't feel good, the most important step is to allow yourself to be in the void. Feel that emptiness. Explore who you are without carrying around old emotional baggage. Because when you resist the temptation to fill the space with anything just to not feel alone, clarity arrives. That clarity that seemed impossible, that deep understanding that you don't need anything other than yourself to feel complete. And that's when everything starts to fall into place. Not because you found the perfect person, the dream job, or the ideal life, but because for the first time, you are whole. When you act from abundance, not lack, everything changes. You no longer desperately seek love, you simply attract it. You no longer have to prove yourself to be accepted. You are accepted because you have proven yourself to yourself. And ultimately, this is what Jung tried to teach us. That true transformation happens when you understand that the world will not change to make you happy, but you can change your inner world. And then, my friend, the rest will follow. You project love, not beg for attention. You attract it, not settle for less, because now you know exactly what you're worth. And this new version of you begins to reflect in everything around you. People who come into your life no longer appear to drain your energy, but to share something real. Opportunities that once seemed impossible are now within your reach, not because the world suddenly became easier, but because you changed. And now that you understand this truth, I want to challenge you. Don't keep this to yourself. There is someone out there who is still stuck in this cycle that you managed to break. Someone who needs to hear exactly what you heard today. So share this message. Help spread this reflection to more people who, like you, are seeking transformation. And if you identified with any part of this journey, tell me here in the comments. Where are you in this process? What have you learned so far? And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so we can continue growing together on this journey of self-knowledge and transformation. Remember, change starts within you, and the rest is just a consequence.